Welcome, my name is Warren Scherich. This is my art gallery and studio in Quartz Hill, California, a suburb of Lancaster, Palmdale, about 50 miles north of Los Angeles. I'm a pluralist, meaning I work in many different media depending on what the object of the art is. I've been lately working on ceramic tiles. I'm also a stone carver and painter. Welcome, and I will take you on a guided tour through my property. Okay, around me here are some finished smaller pieces that I've done. There's some ceramic here and some stonework. The stonework comes from all over. Most of the small pieces were locally collected from Trona, up by Fossil Falls, various places here in Southern California. There's a lot of granite from Little Rock here. And then there are more exotics like this stone here and some others which I will discuss later on in the tour. 3 years ago, this whole place burnt down. We're standing on foundations of what used to be a very large studio, 1,800 square foot studio. And over here is a stump that used to be a big pine tree. That pine tree on the 4th of July 3 years ago got a bottle rocket in it, caught fire, took out my garages and most of my house. Like these old houses, you know, I was paying taxes on all the buildings here, and on the 1960s tax record it had a drawing of this property which showed all these rooms that are now you see on the ground here as just slabs. Well, it turned out none of them were permitted. The only thing that was permitted was this house here, under 600 square feet. That is all I could rebuild without having to go through complete engineering and everything else. But it actually worked to my advantage. For one thing, fires are very nice because you have a lot more space afterwards because everything you own burns up. So it's kind of like refreshing. You know, it's like getting out of a cold stream. You know, you are new. So fires, people complain about having fires. It's actually a good thing because you get to reinvent yourself. So what used to be my home and studio is now an art gallery. So when I rebuilt this property, and it was this house, this section of the house only had water and smoke damage. And so I took it down to bare walls and rebuilt it, but I rebuilt it as a gallery. So in a few minutes I'll show you where the kitchen should be, but I didn't put a kitchen in because I wanted this place strictly as a place to showcase my art and the art of my collaborators. So what you see in this room is mainly older artwork. There's some new artwork from 2020, but there are artwork going back at least 15 years, or maybe even longer in here. Yeah, actually longer, to 84 in some of the ceramic pieces. Here is a painting I'm going to use as an example of my artwork. You can see the Cubist influences in there, also the Mesoamerican influences. Most of my imagery is layered sexual imagery, and this sexual imagery is not there for titillation so much as a metaphor for the human effort, because I think it's our sexual drive that brings us together, makes us have houses, makes us have jobs. It drives humans and all animals. You know, we are an animal. Artwork is a reflection of this primitive drive that we have. This is going to be a constant theme throughout all of my work. So it appears to be very sexual, which it is, but it's sexual as metaphor for the forces that drive human beings and all animals. Now the color that you see here, I really like to celebrate color. And so I use a lot of color, and I have a palette that is fairly unique for an artist. And when I was young, the only paint I could really afford was mist tint house paint. And they come in some wonderful colors. And to paint in the volume that I like to paint, it got affordable that I could massively produce paintings. A little later in this tour we'll go into actually my painting studio where you can see how I work as a painter. Now this sculpture here on these pedestals stacked up. This recently came back from a show up in Siskiyou, in the Siskiyou Art Museum in Dunsmuir. And it's a compilation of ideas throughout the decades. You know, mainly ceramic pieces, then the pedestals I created and decorated them. A lot of animal imagery here, but then a lot of Mesoamerican imagery and a kind of a combination of both. Now there's a painting that circumvents around this room, and it's a compilation of imagery that I've made over the last 30 years. So there's no real new imagery, but more than a celebration of the journey that I've taken as an artist so far. Now there are 2, 4, 6, I don't know, about 8, 9 canvases here. They're designed to read as single canvases, or you can have 1, 2 canvases, 3, 4, middle section. They will read individually or as part of a group, or one really long painting that's 35 feet long. Along the floor here are older ceramic works and some newer ones. And there are things here that I made a long time ago and just sat. And these are the ones that actually survived my fire. A lot of them I originally thought of them as failed projects, but then when I kept them for literally like 10 years, some of these, and then finally they came together. Now here is an example of 3 heads that I created probably 10 years ago. They were actually in the fire and survived. And you know, I made a special clay body for these, but I was never happy with them. But then, you know, when I was working with older material, I put them together, and all of a sudden, you know, I really like what I see. Which, you know, is something I tell people, especially when I'm talking to new artists. Your failed paintings, hang on to them. Your failed artworks, hang on to them, because you don't know if they're failed because they're bad or failed because you're not used to what you're seeing. And they could be the future. They could be an indication of the future and where your art might go. So it's very tricky when you don't like something. Why don't you like it? Because it's not familiar, that's a good thing. If it's bad, that's a bad thing. Okay, in this corner of my gallery, there's a mishmash of old stuff and new. This painting surrounding me here was made in 2020. And again, it's like the others that I talked about over there. You can have standalone paintings or one long painting. And along the bottom here is another example like the one I showed you in there of pieces that were, I considered substandard, but I just kept them around. And then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, after 10 years, I guess it's not all of a sudden, I put them together and I really liked the results. Along the bottom here is a landscape I did from 2020. And it's real experimental. And most of my landscapes now are going in this direction, especially what you see in the background. The way I handle the trees is something that I developed many years ago. So currently, I'm not really developing new material. I'm mining all of the material that I've developed since I started art in my mid-20s. And, you know, I created lots of imagery, lots of work, but I never exhausted the potential of most of those. All right, down across the bottom here are some very contemporary pieces that I made within the last year. This piece here and this piece here I actually made in graduate school back in my 30s. And you know, I had a tremendous amount of those, but most all of those are lost in the fire. And I think I have 4 left of that series. But this represents work from '84.
Yeah, it does. It sounds great. I'm all like listening. I'm like, yeah.